67 years before tech giants started burning billions on zero-emission machinery, one man smoking a cigarette beat them to it. In 1959, he drove an experimental tractor into a dirt field and dropped it in gear. No black soot, no diesel clatter. It ran in total silence on over 1,000 fuel cells, dragging a multi-bottom plow without breaking a sweat. It was a bulletproof, zero-emission rig. So, why didn't it change the world? Because the corporate suits parked it in the dark. They were too busy running an illegal price-fixing cartel, bleeding millions in fines, and burying a miracle of engineering. It became the ultimate cursed legend, a century of engineering that was right about everything, run by men who were wrong about everything that mattered. Before Allis-Chalmers ever turned a furrow or painted a tractor orange, they were pulverizing 5-ton basalt boulders in the sweltering Panamanian jungle. AC put their number 120 Gates gyratory crusher on the nastiest stretch of the Panama Canal dig. It was a 235-ton iron monster with a massive conical head grinding against an iron bowl, wide enough to swallow pickup-sized rocks and shatter them to 7-inch fragments in a single ear-splitting crunch. Spitting out 5,000 cubic yards of jagged rock per shift, it fed the Gatan locks. That's not farm equipment. That's heavy iron reshaping geography. That crusher didn't just appear. Allis-Chalmers was forged in May 1901 through a ruthless industrial merger, the kind J.P. Morgan used to strangle entire industries. 4 heavyweights collapsed into one massive trust on a 160-acre industrial site using a tactic Wall Street called Morganization. The goal was simple: kill price wars and lock up the global machinery market. Edward P. Allis ran heavy steam power. Fraser and Chalmers built mining gear. Gates Iron Works cast the crushers. Dixon Manufacturing turned out massive air compressors and steam power. Total vertical control. On paper, it was a brutal, efficient corporate machine. And for a decade, it worked. The newly formed giants applied the heavy iron, chewing through mountains and driving deep shaft mines. By 1912, financial pressure cracked the frame. Lurching toward bankruptcy, the board had to fold or find new ground. General Otto H. Falk took the wheel and didn't flinch. He looked at the massive American farm sector. John Deere and International Harvester already had it locked down tight. Going after dirt farmers against those two wasn't a safe bet. It was desperate. Falk pushed his chips in anyway. But here's what the tractor story usually leaves out. This company didn't just have an appetite for agricultural risks. They had an appetite for raw engineering that bordered on insanity. From 1919 to 1922, Nikola Tesla chose the Allis-Chalmers plant as his working laboratory. He designed 3 turbines, the largest packing 15 discs, each 60 inches across, designed to produce 675 horsepower entirely on boundary layer friction. No combustion. The best metallurgy of 1922 had no answer for the thermal distortion at those speeds, and the discs warped under testing. Tesla walked, but AC kept building anyway. That same fearless engineering went straight into their farm iron. But General Falk knew that building fearless machines wasn't enough. He needed someone who could actually sell them. So he brought in Tractor Division manager Harry C. Merritt. Merritt was the real rogue mastermind who shoved the rubber tire idea and the loud paint down the board's throat. He knew they couldn't just build machines and hope for the best. The first hurdle wasn't engineering, it was stubborn psychology. Farmers in the 1920s trusted the sweat and muscle of mules. They'd seen clinking iron contraptions promising the moon, only to break down and sink to the axles in spring mud. Convincing a Kansas wheat farmer to bet his livelihood on a tractor built by a mining company was an uphill battle. AC needed to cut through that skepticism fast, and they started by getting loud. In 1922, they hit farmers with a new color, Persian Orange. Not IH Red, not Deer Green. Legend has it that Merritt picked the color after a trip to California, demanding a shade that burned as bright as a ripe Persian orange fruit. It punched through the haze of a dusty field from 100 yards away. Every machine rolled out wearing that paint. Farmers recognized it like a neighbor's truck pulling up the drive. It stuck. With the branding locked, they needed dealers. In 1931, AC bought out the legendary Advance Roomley just to hijack their massive network of rural dealerships. Suddenly, they had a massive footprint right in Deere's backyard. Then came the engineering flash. In 1933, AC strapped racing legend Barney Oldfield into a rubber-tired Model U and ran it flat out across a dirt track at 64.28 miles per hour. A farm tractor doing 64 miles per hour. The crowd lost their minds. The stunt was about those rubber tires, not raw speed. Until then, tractors ran on heavy steel wheels with iron lungs that chewed up roads, jarred operators' teeth loose, and shook machines apart. Pneumatic airplane tires changed physics. They delivered better grip, a smoother ride, and cut fuel consumption by 25%. You could actually drive down a paved road without tearing up the asphalt. West Allis didn't pull those tires out of thin air. They partnered directly with Harvey Firestone, who practically bet his company on making a rubber casing tough enough to survive sharp field stubble. When Oldfield dumped the clutch, Firestone's rubber dug into the dirt and gripped. Oldfield proved it in 30 seconds of roaring, dust-choking speed. The engineering backed up the flash. The 1933 Model WC sold like crazy because it flat out worked. It packed a 3.3-liter, four-cylinder engine that cranked out a solid 22 drawbar horsepower and 30 horses at the belt. That engine was bolted to a rolled steel channel frame instead of heavy cast iron, dropping the weight right when Depression-era farmers were bleeding pennies. It was light enough for small farms, and the rubber tires made it faster and less punishing than anything Deere or IH offered for the money. Allis-Chalmers wasn't just nibbling at the edges. They were taking massive bites. They hired industrial designer Brooks Stevens to style the 1938 Model B, featuring sleek, streamlined modern curves. It cost $495, roughly the price of a draft team and a year's feed. It looked sharp enough for Sunday church, but grunted through Monday's plowing. Sculpted sheet metal proved this wasn't crude iron slapped together by bean counters. Farmers bought in, and their orange iron started dominating county fairs. By the late 1930s, AC had pulled off a miracle. They pivoted a bankrupt mining trust into agriculture, taking the fight straight to entrenched competitors, and won enough ground to matter. The engineers earned every inch of that victory. World War II was brewing. The federal government came knocking with massive classified contracts AC couldn't refuse. War work brought big money and pushed engineers into uncharted territory. It also brought a new breed of suits into the boardrooms. These men didn't give a damn about torque specs or grease under the fingernails, and their appetite for power was about to get incredibly expensive to feed. $14,700 tons of silver. Not gold, not copper, silver, pulled straight from U.S. Treasury vaults, melted and cast into 14-ton electromagnetic coils. Copper was rationed, and the Manhattan Project needed the most conductive metal on Earth to separate weapons-grade uranium. They built those Calutron magnets at West Allis behind the wooden wall, with armed Treasury agents holding Thompson submachine guns on the floor 24/7. The sheer scale of this classified operation was staggering. Between February 1943 and August 1944, workers wound 940 separate coils. At 14 tons each, that totaled 27 million pounds of silver magnet coils. At its peak, the Hawley Road plant workforce was 78% women. They had absolutely no idea what they were building. The work was classified extremely top secret. Ultimately, Allis-Chalmers produced more Manhattan Project equipment by weight than any other company in the United States. Workers on both sides had no idea they were handling Treasury silver. They just turned the wrenches, hit tolerances, and ignored the guys with the guns. That was Allis-Chalmers in the early 40s. Not farm tractors, atomic weapons infrastructure. Walk off the factory floor and into the West Allis boardroom in 1946, and it was a different company. The United Auto Workers called a strike, a hard one. 329 days. Management didn't negotiate straight. The suits dug in. When the picket lines got ugly, they didn't just fight over wages. They flagged workers as communist agitators and fed names to the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC. They weaponized a federal witch hunt against their own assembly line. It went further. AC executive Harold Story helped write the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act, handing management new legal crowbars to break union leverage. Men who spent the war building classified atomic magnets were getting squeezed by laws their own employer drafted. That's not a labor dispute. That's a declaration of war on the guys building your product. The trust between the shop floor and the front office cracked in 1946 and never healed. Every contract negotiation carried the weight of what the suits did. It showed up in slowdowns, work-to-rule actions, and low-grade friction that bleeds a plant's efficiency one shift at a time. When the war ended and classified contracts dried up, AC's engineers pointed that same horsepower back at the farm. What rolled out of West Allis through the 1950s was some of the smartest iron they ever built. Take the rotobaler. Instead of a conventional knotter, it rolled hay into a continuous cylinder and wrapped it with twine. Fewer moving parts meant fewer field breakdowns. Farmers eating dust in 100-degree July heat didn't want to clear a jammed knotter every 40 minutes. The engineers understood that. That early rotobaler was an absolute widowmaker with exposed belts that would grab a jacket sleeve just as fast as a windrow. Feeding time meant pitching that tight 60-pound cylinder by hand, which took some getting used to. The Model G arrived next. It looked bolted together backwards. The engine sat behind the operator, dropping the hood completely. This gave the driver a dead clear sightline straight down the cultivator shovels working a tight row crop. Sounds simple. Try cultivating tight rows with a standard hood blocking your view of the sweeps, and you'll understand why that layout mattered. The real muscle paying the bills was the WD-45. It was the first West Allis rig to pack a factory diesel and punch out over 40 drawbar horsepower, giving the big boys at John Deere an absolute headache. The powertrain work was just as serious. AC didn't just buy Buda diesels, they bought the whole damn Buda engine company in '53. They needed heavy-duty inline units that could take the heat and torque of a full-day pull without going soft, so they brought the manufacturing in-house. As the decade rolled on and the new D-Series tractors hit the dirt, they paired those engines with their power director system. The floor guys called it the Big Stick. It was an oil-bathed clutch sitting between the main engine clutch and transmission. It let you stop ground speed dead while keeping the live PTO spinning at full power. No foot clutch needed. That's a big deal on variable ground when you need to drop speed fast in a soft patch without choking your implement. These engineers built iron that understood what an operator needed at hour 9 of a 12-hour shift. They backed it up with their traction booster system, which automatically shifted the plow's weight right to the rear tires the second they started the slip. It turned a midweight rig into an absolute trench digger. Meanwhile, the iron kept getting built. AC bought out the Gleaner operation in '55, and they were smart enough to leave the winning formula alone. Those combines ran bare galvanized sheet metal across the entire exterior shell because the engineers who originally designed them knew Midwestern dust storms would sandblast traditional paint right off the hull in a single harvest. That bare silver finish wasn't a cost cut, it was the right call. That all-crop harvester could handle everything, from wheat and soybeans to fragile edible beans without a complete header swap. Farmers trusted those machines with their entire year's income. At the same time, West Allis was churning out the M50 Ontos for the Marine Corps, a tracked anti-tank vehicle carrying 6 recoilless ruffles and a cluster mount. They didn't reinvent the wheel to build it. They based the Ontos running gear on the military's existing M56 Scorpion light anti-tank vehicle, proving that grabbing off-the-shelf combat hardware and making it meaner was the smart play. Ontos is Greek for the thing. The name fit. It looked like a mechanical spider built to ruin someone's day. In close urban fighting, it could fire all 6 rifles at once and punch straight through concrete. It proved exactly that in the streets of Hugh. Grain combines and concrete busters off the same floor, out of the same workforce. That split personality defined the company by the late 1950s. Brilliant engineers cranking out machines for both ends of the spectrum. A farm market buying orange iron in serious volume, and a defense pipeline keeping the lights on when commodity prices softened. From the outside, it looked like a healthy, diversified company. Inside, the frame was already cracked. The boardroom's appetite for shortcuts was about to produce something that made the labor wars look like a minor grievance. Remember that silent, zero-emission tractor we talked about at the start? October 1959. Dr. Harry Eyrig pulls that modified D12 onto a dirt field, lights his cigarette, and drops it in gear. Just a low hum and clean torque pulling the rig on 1008 alkaline fuel cells wired under the hood. They cranked out roughly 20 horsepower and laid down 3,000 pounds of drawbar pull, dragging a multi-bottom plow through the dirt without breaking a sweat. He smoked that cigarette the whole run, right next to the volatile hydrogen system. Nothing to ignite, nothing spewing out the stack. The engineers in that field knew exactly what they had. The suits didn't. AC didn't win the Apollo contract, Pratt & Whitney took that crown, but their fuel cells were too good to ignore. The defense industry pulled that tech straight into Air Force orbital labs and deep-sea research. Think about that. AC's engineers were so far ahead, their power plants went to orbit, while their boardroom couldn't sell them on Earth. The zero-emission tractor got parked in the dark. The roaring diesels got the budget. By 1961, their diesel line was turning out some of the hardest pulling iron in the country. The 1961 D19 ran a turbocharged 4.36-cylinder, putting 67 horsepower to the drawbar, the biggest number in its class. Those legacy Buddha-designed engines had a fatal flaw. Under forced induction heat and cylinder pressure, the head gasket fire rings went soft. The wet cylinder liners rattled loose. Black smoke, heavy torque, a roaring stack, and a weak bottom end. Farmers bought them by the thousands. They built high-tech power for astronauts and heavy orange iron for Kansas wheat farmers, both world-class. On paper, early 1960s Allis-Chalmers looked bulletproof. Heavy machinery, agriculture iron, defense, aerospace, fully funded and staffed with brilliant gearheads. The suits were busy poisoning the well. In 1961, the DOJ dropped an antitrust hammer on AC, General Electric, and Westinghouse. The executives were running a price-fixing cartel on heavy electrical gear, rigging bids to gorge their margins. They used aliases and payphones. They assigned code numbers. AC was number 3. They even timed their rigged bids using literal phases of the moon. It was a straight-up criminal conspiracy run on a lunar calendar. The feds hit AC with massive fines and sent executives to federal prison. The giant bled millions in damages. The financial hit hurt, but the reputation hit was fatal. Decades of hard-earned trust with utilities burned to the ground. Loyal customers walked away. Desperate to plug the bleeding balance sheet, the board panicked. Panic bred hubris. Instead of fixing what worked, the suits chased nuclear power. AC helped build the Pathfinder atomic plant in South Dakota, utilizing a boiling superheater reactor. Great on blueprints, a nightmare in the dirt. The superheater ran at 100% capacity for exactly 30 minutes before cracked tubes and a fractured core shut it down. 30 minutes of power. The decommissioning costs buried them. Then came Big Alice. Con Ed hired AC to build a 1,000-megawatt turbine generator for the Ravenswood plant in Queens, the largest on Earth. The machine's main lube oil pumps ran off the electrical grid. When the grid tripped during the 1965 Northeast blackout, the battery backups failed and oil pressure vanished. The high-pressure side of that massive cross-compound shaft was still spinning at 3,600 RPM, dry. The bearings shrieked and ground to burning dust. Millions lost power, and AC took the public beating. Staring down the barrel of a collapse, the suits made a baffling pivot. In 1968, the company released the Terra Tiger, a screaming 10-horsepower two-stroke JLO engine, 6 low-pressure balloon tires, and a cheap plastic tub. The exact garbage material AC's West Allis foundrymen despised. Marketing called it an amphibious trail rider for duck hunters. A firm that cast 235-ton rock crushers for the Panama Canal and built power plants for orbit was now hawking a plastic toy. It fixed nothing. The nuclear bleeding continued. The electrical division was dead in the water. Their bread-and-butter farm equipment division was barreling toward the worst agriculture crash since the Depression. The mechanics kept showing up, wrenching on hot iron worth running. The boardroom had lost the plot. The clock was out. When a giant runs out of time, there's only one move left. Before the 80s farm crisis, David C. Scott took over as president in September 1968 to block a hostile takeover by white Consolidated Industries. Scott didn't care about legacy, the workforce, or 57 years of Persian Orange paint. He looked at AC like a salvage boss looking at a sinking freighter. You cut dead weight, seal the hatches, and don't cry over what goes overboard. That ruthless mindset was baked in a full decade before the market collapsed. Yet under this doomed regime, the engineers swung hard right to the bitter end. The HD-41 hit the dirt at over 160,000 pounds, swinging a massive 20-foot blade backed by a turbocharged 28L Cummins V12, pushing 524 horsepower. When that machine leaned into a cut, it didn't negotiate. It just moved earth. AC had prototypes in '63 and rolled out the production rig in 1970, holding the title of the world's biggest production dozer for years. The catch? The final drives and tracks couldn't handle the raw torque, literally tearing themselves into iron shards. The heavy construction division caught the same disease, getting spun out into the Fiat Alice joint venture in '74 until that side of the house bled out entirely. Meanwhile, their Gleaner N6 combine ran a transverse rotary threshing system that chewed through damp crops that would choke a conventional cylinder and walker machine into plugged steaming mess. When the agriculture collapse came, it hit like a sledgehammer. Carter's 1980 Soviet grain embargo choked export demand overnight. Interest rates spiked to 21.5%, making financing heavy orange iron mathematically impossible. Land values crashed. Farmers drowning in expansion debt missed payments and equipment sales flatlined. The farm division was already bleeding from heavy losses in nuclear and electrical equipment. When the agriculture market dried up, there was zero cushion to absorb the blow. The West Dallas foundry had poured the iron for AC's crushers, tractors, and combines since the early days. Generations of the same families sweated over those hot sand molds. Scott killed it. No restructuring, no gradual phase-out. He locked the doors, and the men who'd spent their lives breathing that foundry dust walked out for good. He gutted the pensions. In October 1985, AC wiped out 11 employee plans, dumping a $170 million liability on the feds and leaving 6,800 workers empty-handed. Not restructured, terminated. These folks built the iron, starved through the 329-day strike in '46, sweat out the federal Hijack investigations, and kept punching the clock through every bad boardroom decision. Every nightmare the UAW warned about in 1946 came true when Scott finished gutting the place. Cuts alone couldn't save the farm division, so Scott sold it. In 1985, AC signed the agricultural operation over to Deutz, a German outfit forming Deutz Allis. The sale brought in $107 million in cold cash, but the boardroom made a $153 million loss just to get the liquidity. They had no other way out. The engineers who'd spent their lives building the Gleaner combines and those heavy 2WD tractor lines watched a foreign company take the keys to everything they'd built. Deutz showed exactly what they thought of the AC legacy. Deutz didn't just slap on a plate flat spring green over the Persian Orange. They ripped out the brand's proven water-cooler blocks and shoved in their own air-cooled diesels, tearing the soul right out of the tractors on the assembly line. 57 years of hard-earned brand loyalty, 57 years of farmers spotting that orange across a dusty field, choked out by a color that belonged on a hospital wall. The market didn't reject the orange. It got painted over because the new bosses wanted their own stamp on the asset, and the history, buried underneath, meant absolutely nothing. Ask any operator who ran orange iron how they felt watching those green machines roll out. The answer isn't complicated. It showed on the sales floor. Deutz Allis didn't last either. The brand flipped again in 1990 to AGCO, which still builds the Gleaner line today. The Allis-Chalmers name, that iconic orange paint, the rumbling West Dallas foundry, the pensions, the fuel cell research, it all went dead quiet. What Scott and the boardroom suits did from the inside finished a kill job that John Deere and Caterpillar never could have pulled off from the outside. The iron refused to quit until the men signing the checks decided the legacy wasn't worth saving. Somewhere in that wreckage, locked in a rusting filing cabinet, sat the blueprints for their 1959 working fuel cell tractor. While the Allis-Chalmers name died, the ghost of their engineering is currently haunting the modern agriculture industry. Right now, tech giants are burning billions trying to crack hydrogen powertrains for agriculture. Engineers are camped in labs trying to push clean torque through a drivetrain without a diesel. Dr. Harry Eyrig beat them to it back in 1959. That wasn't a concept, that was a working rig, and it ran 67 years before today's crowd figured out hydrogen was worth chasing. When a billionaire pitches zero-emission machinery today like it's a new idea, remember, Allis-Chalmers had the blueprint. The suits parked it. Turbo diesels were selling, and fuel cells didn't offer a fast buck. The DOJ cartel fines bled $45 million straight from the reserves Eyrig needed for production. The cartel didn't just burn credibility, it gutted the exact technology that could have kept AC alive for another century. Today, that decision looks worse. The global battery supply chain is a chokehold. China controls 95% of the world's magnesium and 99% of its gallium. You're negotiating from a weak hand before you even sketch a machine. Lithium-ion packs bring another headache EV brochures ignore. Sheer mass. Slap a 6,000-pound battery on a field tractor and you get deep subsoil compaction. It crushes the dirt solid, killing crop yields by 15%. Software updates can't fix physics. Hydrogen sidesteps this entirely. A compressed gas fuel cell doesn't need a massive lithium pack, cobalt, or rare earth metals. AC's 1959 rig used propane, oxygen, and potassium hydroxide. Basic chemistry. Stuff you can source without handing your supply chain to a foreign government. AGCO, who owns what's left of AC's farm division, knows this. Their Fendt brand is pushing the Helios hydrogen prototype to bypass that exact supply chain trap. It's the spiritual successor to iRig's D12. The core physics haven't changed since '59, just the packaging. Helios uses pricey, high-pressure hydrogen tanks strapped to the cab roof to hit the exact endurance numbers iRig already proved. It costs more, it's more complicated, and it's still chasing a result AC already had spinning tires when Eisenhower was president. That's what makes the waste hard to stomach. The engineering didn't fail. The tractor worked. The NASA gear worked. The physics were bulletproof. The management failed. The suits ran an illegal bid-rigging ring, burned $45 million, and drained R&D. Executives chased nuclear contracts blind to the risks. The board hired David Scott to gut pensions and shutter foundries instead of protecting the one technology that could have saved them. Corporate rot simply dragged the company down. If you've turned wrenches in this trade, that stings. You can fix a bad machine. You can diagnose a blown turbo, weld a cracked frame, or rebuild an injection pump. Solvable problems. You can't fix a boardroom running criminal schemes and torching the company's name while the engineers 2 buildings over wire power systems for orbital defense labs. There's no torque spec for that. No manual covers it. West Allis didn't get beat by Caterpillar Iron or Deere's dealer network. Cat and Deere didn't lift a finger. The executives destroyed it themselves, leaving AC as nothing but a stripped frame. Gleaner combines still harvest, and those massive HD41 crawlers are still pushing dirt. That 1959 fuel cell tech is exactly what the industry is scrambling to rebuild today. Not one piece of that iron failed. The boardroom simply looked at a clean-running tractor throwing dirt in Wisconsin and saw a novelty, not a product line. They treated the mechanics who built it like liabilities instead of lifeblood. When Deutz took the keys and reached for the paint gun, they didn't just change a color. They sprayed a tombstone over what the suits had already killed. Today, the ground where iRig built that tractor, and where armed guards once watched over Treasury silver, is smothered under blacktop, a strip mall, overpriced apartments called the Apiary, a home to suites. While the factory floor got paved over, the iron survived. The Smithsonian owns that exact D12. But instead of sitting dead center in D.C., it spends its time on loan to a county historical society up in Minnesota. If any company in your industry is running the same play right now, sell the good division, gut the pension, call it a partnership, drop it in the comments. We read every one. And if this kind of heavy history is what you come here for, subscribe. We don't make this for the algorithm.